Hi, welcome to this video concerning the Bible. The Bible is the holy book of Christianity. It is comprised of 73 books. So it's one canon, but it is comprised of many books. And these 73 books are divided into the Old Testament, which contains the Torah, which is, of course, the foundational holy book of Judaism. It contains the Apocrypha, and it contains the New Testament. Um, and all in all, there are 73 books written by between 40 to 50 people, separate authors, over a span of time that approaches 2 millennia. So it's on the surface, it should be a disparate piece of work. You know, all these different people separated by such a long time, and separated, geographically as well. You might think, okay, well, this cannot form a cohesive whole, but it does. It forms not only a cohesive whole, but the Bible has a linear narrative, a cohesive linear narrative that makes sense, and not just makes sense, but stays remarkably stable as a narrative throughout. Even though, of course, there are many different sort of subplots. The Bible has this overarching narrative, which is clear, but of course, there's many different stories, and then there aren't just many different stories. There are many different stories told from different perspectives. There is what's known as recapitulation, where one story will be told from the perspective of a different character within the story. There are different genres, ranging from Job, which is written as a play, to more traditional kind of narrative forms of stories, to poems, to songs. The Bible is just this incredibly rich, incredibly varied, and yet at the same time miraculously cohesive, and coherent narrative structure. So the reason I'm making this video is not just to bang on about how amazing the Bible is, but actually to make the point that it is one linear narrative and it can be understood as such. And this is really important because sometimes people will read the Bible and they will do so in a sort of chapter and verse way, and they will not see it as being a story, the story of salvation, of our salvation. They will see it as being a collection of kind of quotations, or a collection of verses which they can pick and choose from, and which they can use when they're useful. So, if you're making a particular point, let's say, a particular theological point, you can just pick the verse that supports your argument at that time. But that's not how the Bible is supposed to be understood. The reason we're able to do this, it goes back to the invention of the Codex, the kind of proto-book. The Bible was, when it was kind of being collated together, the Old Testament at least, it was shared. It was from oral. I mean, it began as an oral tradition, and then the oral tradition was written down by scribes, and it was written down on these huge scrolls. And scrolls were expensive to make, and that they required a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of expertise, and so you couldn't just dip in and out. You had to really invest in reading the whole thing, and ideally committing as much of it as possible to memory. In fact, our ability, human ability to memorize narratives, or to memorize information like a tract of text, is severely limited compared to ancient peoples. In many ways, it's not even comparable. And that's due to the codex, like all technology, I guess, making us more powerful in one sense, but also taking away our ability to do things in another sense, and making us kind of less powerful and more dependent on the technology. But that's a separate issue. The point is that now we have a Bible where it has been divided up into verses, and that's useful for reference purposes. But it has also led, I think, to people overlooking the fact that it has a narrative, it tells a story. And what I'd like to do is to do a really brief overview of that story. Um, I'm going to do it according to a tried and tested formula. This is something called Freytag's pyramid. It's a way of structuring a story along 5 points, and it was popularized by a German playwright called Gustav Freytag. I can't recommend his work because I don't know what it is. I only know of his pyramid. So we'll have a look at it now. So Freytag's pyramid divides a plot line or narrative into these 5 points, and they are the exposition, the rising action, the climax, the peak of the pyramid, and then we have falling action and resolution. So the exposition is where the scene is set. The rising action is how the narrative proceeds towards whatever the main part of the narrative is, whether that be it's got to be some sort of event. It could be a catastrophe, it could be a triumph. It depends on the narrative you're reading. Then we have the falling action, so the consequences of whatever the main event of the story is, and then the resolution. And this part is kind of drawing the story to a close. This is where we learn, is the story going to be a happy ending? Is it going to be a tragedy? This is where that kind of rounding off the story takes place. Now, if somebody wants to know what the Bible is about, the entire Christian Bible, well, the exposition, the scene, is the fall of man. This is where humankind becomes separated from God. Humankind takes knowledge that was not meant for them at the time. This is described in Genesis as taking fruit from the tree of knowledge, and the fruit itself is the knowledge of good and evil. So it allows people to do good and do evil. It allows people to do what is God's will and to rebel against God's will. And they do this after being tricked by the enemy of God, who we know is Satan. And if you're interested in reading more about this part of the story, the setting of the scene, the theological terms that you find attached to this is original sin, which is this idea that this rebellion against God is something that we all inherit. We all inherit this natural inclination, or this natural proclivity to rebel against God and to do what is right in our own eyes, and to chase after very kind of immediate gratification. This of course is a huge part of human psychopathology. Much of the reason why we become addicted to substances, or we develop behaviors that make us ill in the long term, is because they help us in the short term. We develop maybe a behavior of avoiding conflict because we don't want to experience the uncomfortable feelings that come with that. And of course, that makes problems for us in life when we can't actually get what we want out of life and we end up used by other people. Or we develop a taste for alcohol, let's say, in a bid to escape feelings of anxiety. Perhaps it becomes the only way we can talk to strangers. And then before you know it, we have a problem. Well, that's basically linked to this. This inbuilt proclivity we have to chase after comfort, to avoid suffering, and to look for short-term euphoria, whether it be through drugs or sex or whatever else. But yeah, you can see how that is linked into the theological concept of original sin. But anyway, as the story progresses, we have the rising action. And this is the preparation for the Messiah, the Anointed One in Hebrew, who will who will save us, who will bridge the gap that we have created through our rebellion, and undo the fall. The plan of salvation involves God creating a nation who will be tasked with delivering the Messiah into the world, a nation who will be a priestly nation. And we know this nation today as the Jews, the Jewish people. Now, it's all quite complicated how this comes about. It includes a series of promises known as covenants made between God and man. There's 5 of those that lead up and enable the birth of the Messiah in the Holy Land, where the Jewish people live, the people who become the Jews anyway. So, or we'll say at the time they're the Israelites, let's say, who are made up of 12 different tribes, who all have, they have differing fates, I guess, in the narrative. But the point is that the enemy, that is Satan, who is the kind of spiritual being who is opposed to God, and is not alone in his opposition, but is could be regarded as the head of a spiritual coalition who seek to shape our behaviors, who seek to tempt us to do things that are not in our interest, that harm us and harm others. This enemy tries to disrupt this plan of salvation, but it does not succeed, because the climax of the story is the birth, the life, the ministry and teachings of the Messiah, Jesus Christ, his death, his resurrection, and his ascension into heaven. So the Messiah is born, he teaches the world how to be reunited with God, and then he makes this possible. He bridges the gap between God and man by sacrificing himself as an atonement for the sin that separated man from God in the first place, and that can continue to do so. So it is now possible. The fall has been reversed. The fall of man, now that Jesus has ascended, he has reversed the fall, and he has made it possible for us to have a relationship with God, and to not just have a relationship with God here on earth, but to join with God after our death. And the theological terms that are associated with this are things like Paschal, which literally means related to Passover, which is something that happens in the Old Testament, and prefigures Christ's death and resurrection. And the theological term it fully is Paschal mystery, because the nature of Christ's sacrifice of himself and God's sacrifice of, at the same time, himself and his son is mysterious in many ways, and it's something that we ponder and meditate on, and we understand in little bits and bobs, but the full understanding of it is probably something we're only going to achieve in our new life after an earthly death. Anyway, so we have the exposition, we have the setting of the scene, the fall of man, we have the rising action, we have the plan of salvation where the Messiah is brought into the world, we have the climax, we have the Messiah coming into the world, teaching us how to regain our relationship with God, and making that possible by bridging that gap, by undoing the gap that's been created between us and God, and giving us our teachings where we can go against our proclivities, we can go against the inclinations that original sin has left in us. And then we have the falling action, so the consequences of this, and this is called the church age. The theological term here would be called the church age, but it's the age we're living in right now. Essentially, the Messiah, Jesus Christ, he has ascended into heaven, but he has apostles. So he has disciples who follow him, people like me, and he has apostles, people who are sent out into the world to continue his teachings. And their job is to go out and to bring as many people to God as possible. We're all drawn to God, we're all drawn to worship, at any rate. I suppose many of us, the majority of us actually, are drawn to worship, but we're not drawn towards God. We reject the idea of God because worshipping God requires great sacrifice, and of course, as I said before, man's inclination is not toward that. It is towards self-interest. It is towards immediate gratification. So anyway, these apostles, they go out, and we call them priests, or these days, and they spread the Messiah's teachings in the world, and the enemy continues to try to disrupt this plan because the enemy does not want people going to church, building a relationship with God, falling in love with God, making the necessary sacrifices, worshipping Him in the right way, developing as people, and growing towards the perfection that they were always meant to be, to grow into their natural state of being, because that is what happens when you worship God in the correct way, and the enemy does not want that. So that's the age we're living in right now, and that's what's going on, and that's, we're living in this battleground where God and His church, made up of His apostles on earth, that which we know as the Catholic Church, is reaching out and is welcoming people in and is teaching them in the ways of Jesus Christ. And the enemy is reaching out and enticing people away and enticing people into drugs, sex, comfort, anything to make them forget about the God-shaped hole in their hearts and to concentrate on satisfying their immediate base desires right now, right here, and essentially leading them, into death, into real death, the second death, not just death. I die here on earth, my body dies, but my soul dies. So we're there, and then the next stage in the story is the resolution, and that is the final judgment of this world and the people in it, and the beginning of the new world, the new creation. So the forces of God and the forces of the enemy meet in a final climactic battle. How this takes place, it's hard to say. Catholics like myself, we don't generally believe in an actual kind of battle that takes place, a military battle in the Valley of Megiddo, known as Armageddon. We tend to kind of think of the church in an ongoing spiritual battle that, of course, has real casualties. Because as far as I'm concerned, you can trace things like murders and assassinations, and Charlie Kirk, I think, a very good and a holy man, a man who's close to God, a good servant of his, was recently murdered. He was shot by someone who was moved by a spirit who hated Charlie, hated God, and hated the person who took the shot as well. So we see it as this is an ongoing battle, and it will reach a climax, perhaps a final kind of climactic event. How that is, I think there's debate, or what that looks like, I think there's debate. But that will happen before the world and the heavens are brought to a close by God. So He will pull down the curtain. There will be an end to this, and a new world and a new heaven, a new creation will begin. What that's like, don't know, because I'm currently limited by my neuronal architecture, as are you. I don't have a frame of reference to imagine what life outside of space and time is like, or along more dimensions of space and time than I have already experienced. I cannot begin to understand, but I do know it will happen because it's been promised to me. And of course, it's been promised by someone I trust very much, that being God. Theological terms associated with this are parousia, literally presence, eschaton and eschatology, which is literally last, and study of the last things. So there we are. If you ever wanted to know what the story of the Bible is, it is the fall and the separation of man from God. It is preparation for the Messiah to enter the world. It is the life, death, resurrection of that Messiah and his ascent into heaven. It is the church's ongoing mission, an ongoing spiritual battle with the enemy who seeks to derail all of this, who seeks to derail the salvation of anyone. And then it is the final judgment, and then new creation, and ultimately that is us all entering into the life that we were always supposed to be, always supposed to live in. It is us returning to our natural habitat. It is us returning to the world that we hunger for anyway. You know, when we seek out perfect judgment and we get annoyed that there isn't really perfect justice in this world, and we get annoyed that there isn't a true beauty that is unflawed in this world, and there we we seek out kind of true charity that we don't really find in this world. It's almost as if we hunger for a kindness that doesn't exist. There is this perfection of what we want in life is not there, but we still want it, and that is bizarre because we've never experienced it. But of course, it's ingrained in us, and it is like a little echo of the world that we are destined to not just enter into, but return to, because it's where we've always belonged anyway. So yeah, that's the whole Bible, I guess, according to Freytag's pyramid. Of course, there are so many amazing stories that make up this story. So many amazing subplots that, you know, everybody should read the entire Bible, beginning to end, all 73 books. Don't limit yourself to 66 books like some Protestants do. You're missing out some absolute gold. All 73 books. And I think this is the time to do it, because if the world needs anything right now, it needs to be turning to Christ. So thanks a lot, and I hope somebody out there gets something from this. Bye.